BBC, inspiring Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. Today we focus on the Executive Order 3 that was given by the President, especially focusing on two areas. The directive was given to the Prime Minister to effect it. Two areas have been hurt by this, especially if you look at charcoal and look at timber. The ban of those two makes it big. But when we look at the forest cover of this country that left us by 1990 were 24%. By 2015 were 9%. And now currently we're heading north of 11.66%. How has charcoal affected us? That's the biggest question we have. And as the prices begin to rise and soon to be about to hit 100,000 of a bag of charcoal, what are the alternatives? That's where we get to. We discuss the challenges tonight. We also discuss the solutions on what needs to be done, especially since 70 to 90% of households are using charcoal as energy for them. Can renewable energy come into this discussion? Can clean energy be part of this discussion today? So let me introduce the panel. The biggest part of our panel, starting on the extreme left there, Mr. Tom Okello, who is the Executive Director of the National Forest Authority. He has spent 24 years in natural resource management, 15 years as a senior manager at the Uganda Wildlife Authority. He's here to answer what mandate does NFA have and what is it doing about some of the challenges we have today. Next to him, he is no stranger if it comes to agriculture or engineering. He's a researcher, he's a scientist, and an agricultural engineer. He is Dr. Simon Kizito, who is also a senior lecturer in the Department of Forestry at Makerere University. He's one of the guests we have here when we want to discuss both the politics but also solutions on where we're going. Honorable Gerard Martin Mapenduzi, Member of Parliament for Bandege Laibi, and also he is the chairperson of Public Service and Local Government in Parliament. Finally, she's a lady who is no stranger in areas of research, but also having an objective opinion on some of the discussions we have here. She's a social scientist. She is a policy maker there. She is the Dean at the Women and Gender Affairs at Makerere University. That's our panel, and that's where we get our discussion here. So let's watch a clip.
And that even with 1.5 degrees C of global warming, there will be increasing heat waves, longer warm seasons, and shorter cold seasons, which will become more intense at 2 degrees C of warming. In Uganda, about 70% of the population use firewood, causing serious deforestation. Are there solutions? Tonight on Behind the Head.
Yes, so you have had a sneak peek of what our discussion is here. We want to discuss terminologies that you have had, biomass or biodegradation. We're discussing how the ecosystem in this country can go on, especially looking at the effects that climate change is bringing with the deforestation in this country. So you've met the panel. Now you can be part of the show. Go to our YouTube channel there. Drop your comment. Let us know what you think. Or text us or WhatsApp us on this number, 0709 60 92 25. That's our number for you to be able to text us or WhatsApp us. Also our Twitter handle, #UBC Behind the Headlines. Lady and gentlemen, you're very welcome. And I'm glad to host Dr. Simon and also Mr. Okello for the first time here. And thank you both for coming through and gracing our invite here today. Mr. Okello, I think it's only right that I start with you, looking that this docket looks like your mandate going forward. There are private foresters in this area. They have been natural forests in this area, and you have the mandate to be able to look after them. But let's start with the simplest of all. What's the status of our forest cover in this country, and what challenges are you facing as NFA?
Now, thank you so much, the moderator, and thank you so much, our viewers, for tonight's show. As the moderator put it at the beginning, by 1900, the forest cover in the country was about 53% of the total land area. This means that we had more forest in the country than any other land use at that time. 53%. And I think that is what motivated the then British Prime Minister and Member of Parliament, Sir Churchill, to describe Uganda to be the Pearl of Africa. If you read his memo, he said from east to west, north to south, the whole country is green carpet. Apart from the diseases and the malaria and the insects and what, let us concentrate on Uganda because it was the real pearl of Africa. Now, at that time, the population was very low. Because I remember by independence, around 1962, the population of Uganda was about 7.2 million people. Now, by 1990, where we started modern land use, land cover mapping, using modern equipment, the forest cover of Uganda was at 24%. And this dropped, as you put it, to less than 10% by 2015. And over the years, from 2015 to date, we have seen a slight increase in the forest cover. You know that the government, under the National Development Plan 3, has a target to increase this forest cover to 15% at the time the NDP 3 is ending. Yes, we are moving towards that direction. But of late, we have seen challenges, especially the challenges of increasing human population. I told you by 1990, I think our population was about 14 million. Now we are 45 million people. By that time, we had what we call the buffer zones. You had the forest reserves, we had the national parks and the wildlife reserves, but we had buffer zones, areas which were demarcated. People knew these are areas protecting the forest or protecting the national park. To date, because of the increasing population, the buffer zones are all gone. There is no more connectivity. If you look at Bunyoro, for example, you could probably see a continuum of forest from Budongo all through up to Kibale National Park at that time, around 1990, from the modern satellite imaging which we get. But to date, there are pockets of forest now. The continuation is long gone. The corridors are no more. People are now too much close to the protected areas because of the increasing population. And that has also put mankind into direct conflict with nature. You have heard about the human-wildlife conflict. Because of the habitat destruction, we are now more exposed to the wildlife, especially chimpanzees which were living in this forest in the Albertine Rift. Now, one other challenge which we are seeing is that in Uganda, right now, 65% of the urban dwellers are still using charcoal as their source of main means for cooking. 65% in the urban area. Meanwhile, in the rural area, the percentage goes up to about 90%. So these and the fact that people want more land for agriculture is really affecting the forest cover in this country. And not only that, there's the high demand for construction material. The increase in population, the improvement in the economy means that the purchasing power is increasing. More and more people are building better houses now. Now, better houses, you need better roofing materials. And one of the raw material which is used is timber. So we are also seeing a lot of problems with demand for timber, both from the natural forest, but also from the plantations. The good thing is that Uganda has embraced tree planting, both in the forest reserves and alliances, but also in private plantations. We are seeing an increase in plantation forest, which is a good step because it will alleviate the pressure on the natural forest. So for now, that is where we are as a country. The situation in some area is not good because what we have done now, we have disaggregated the forest cover statistics to the district levels. We have districts which has basically no forest in this country. At one point, I will come here and tell you which districts are doing very badly. We had districts which had a lot of natural forest, apart from the tropical high forest, which were in the Albertine Rift, especially, for example, in northern Uganda, in Acholi sub-region, for example, in Karamoja, and parts of Lango, parts of West Nile. We still had a lot of natural forest around 1990. But because of charcoal and also conversion of land for agriculture, most of these natural forests have gone. If I can give you a very quick statistics for Acholi, for example. By 1990, the woodland, which is a forest, was 1.1 million hectares. To date, we are at less than 300,000 hectares. So this is what is happening. And most of it is either agriculture, because we are also seeing an increase in commercial farming, especially in Mwea district and Amuru, but it is mainly charcoal.
But you have spoken about the Acholi region and talked about 1.1 dwindling to about 300 hectares there. What challenges are failing you to keep us there?
To keep?
Keep us at that forest cover.
No, you see, the problem which we are having, when you look at the forest cover we are talking about, we are not talking of forestry, which is government forest only. The forest cover is measured for the country. We measured forestry on government forest reserves and government protected areas like the wildlife conservation areas, because wildlife conservation areas are forest. You hear about the Buindi impenetrable national parks. Those are forest reserves. The Mount Renzori, the Mount Elgon, those are all forested areas. So we have the wildlife conservation areas and then the government forest reserves, both the local and the central forest reserve. Those are government. But we also measure forestry, which is on private land. Now, the forest on private land is managed by you, the landowner. And the district local governments oversee these forests on private land. Now, most of this reduction which I'm talking about is on the forest on private land. If I can give you statistics, 1990, forest on private land was 70% of the total forest cover. That 24%, which was 3.9 million hectares. At that time, 3.9 million hectares was the forest cover for the country. 70% was on private land. 30% was the government protected areas. To date, the data has changed, the statistics has changed. We are now seeing 40% is only the one remaining on private land. 60% now is on the government protected area. Yet, the acreage of the government protected area has not increased. So that shows you that the proportion of forestry on the private land is reducing, thereby making that one to be seen to be increasing, and yet the land area has not increased.
Okay, let me come back to you. Doctor, let me come to you. A lot has been said about charcoal, timber, the challenges that the NFA has there. What's your reading especially of the impact, especially when you look at this ban and where we're going as a country?
The ban is there, and in my opinion, the ban should be there. Because the ban has two advantages, to echo what my colleague has said. The ban will kind of reorganize the value chain such that we can have sustainable. I don't think the ban will be a blanket ban for long. I think it's going to organize the value chain. We have proper methods of production of charcoal that are sustainable. But now, going to what is there, there's been a demand as the population of Uganda has been increasing. Right now, we've just had the market prices show that a bag of charcoal is 100,000. And from our research, an average bag of charcoal will weigh between 25 to at most 40 kilograms, depending on the species that were used to convert the charcoal. Now, when you divide the unit cost of a kilogram of charcoal, has surpassed even some of the pricing for food. So that food energy nexus and the bursting populations that are within the East African region and the Sub-Saharan region is just going to continue driving environmental degradation. Because apparently now, we have already heard from the previous discussant that in the rural areas it's 90%. I think for some communities it's an understatement. You may find that it's higher than 90%. And well, the ban is in place, and I said it should be there, but I think there's need for preparation of the population to accept the ban and have a way of transiting to fill the gap that's going to be left by charcoal. I was joking with my friends that you can be in a climate change, environmental protection meeting, and after the meeting on your way back to Kampala, everyone is stopping to buy charcoal and loading it on the truck and going back. So because energy is such intermingled with economy, with food, with social well-being, there's going to be need of alternatives, because community and livelihoods still must continue. And apparently, if we redefined who the poor is, I think everyone is poor in terms of energy, because I have Honorable here, I'll ask him whether he uses gas and electricity alone. If you say that I use firewood or charcoal, then we are all in the same what? In the same bracket, simply because for a long time biomass has been the most easily accessible, the cheapest, even if it has many disadvantages in terms of degrading the environment. So moving forward and making the presidential directive operational, we're going to need to have solutions to operationalize the ban. Otherwise, I'm seeing a scenario where it will be a bullet for a bag of charcoal, if there are no alternatives.
Interesting you say a bullet for a bag of charcoal.
Yes.
But when you look at this and the numbers that Mr. Okello has put out there, 90%, 70%, the price of charcoal, the length at which we have been using charcoal as biomass for energy and heating, do you think this is a knee-jerk reaction, especially in this executive order? You say the population is not prepared.
The population is not prepared. Like I said, community stratification according to incomes is flattened when you come to energy. The poor is using biomass, so are the rich. We have these statistics that maybe 20% are using gas or, LPG gas or electricity to cook, but they're using it as an emergency means. The mainstay is what? Is biomass. They have stores packed. I have heard that people, when they have a chance, they buy bags and store, maybe to control for deficiencies in future supply or something like that. So I think it's a knee-jerk.
Okay.
The population is not yet ready, and there are not so many alternatives, at least ones that are commercially available.
I hope that when we're done with the challenges, we'll come to the solutions for you. Honorable Jara, being that you are the Member of Parliament for Bandege, especially in Laibi, looking at how much charcoal comes in there, on this executive order, areas at Teso, Acholi region, Lango region, and also you being the chairman of the public service and local government, what is your reading of this ban, and do you see it justified?
Well, it is good the president has come up with this executive. But you see, a lot more should have been done before, leave alone the executive order.
What do you mean a lot more should have been done before?
There are things that government needed to have done much earlier to salvage this situation. And I'm saying the executive order is coming a little late. It's not bad, but it's coming a little late because a lot of destruction has already taken place. And I'll try to give you an account of the experiences we had from 2012 to 2017. Actually, that was the period, as Mr. Okello is trying to put it, that was the period actually sub-region experienced the worst form of environmental destruction. We have had an experience where people have traveled from every part of the country, invaded the villages, renting land, cutting everything and leaving the land bare, indiscriminate tree cutting at commercial level. And some of these charcoal burners, actually the charcoal burners are even hired people. The people involved in the business are highly placed people, and the burners are jobless young people from different parts of the country, taken, and they would establish camps, different camps. Cutting, you would find one group of about 50 people cutting 200 acres bare. That's the kind of situation we are faced with. So the time I was district chairman, I'm sure you followed some of the stories and how I was struggling. First, I think the law enforcement agencies fail us. But it's understandable because quite a number of them got involved in the business. Because you would ask yourself why trucks would leave northern Uganda overloaded, carrying hundreds of bucks. In one day you would have over 200 trucks in a convoy. And they are not stopped. They are overloading, they are carrying illegal products, they are not blocked. There are so many roadblocks they would pass through. So the question of law enforcement, there are laws, there are rules to follow. Clearly stipulate, if you want to get involved in forest products, dealing in forest products, there are procedures to follow. There are officers responsible. So that is the kind of dilemma. And then I'll give you the other picture. Between, and I know Mr. Okello will recall this, between 2016, 2017, something new came up. We started seeing people targeting certain type of trees, indigenous tree species. And the target was majorly on Afzelia africana.
Yeah.
Afzelia africana, we call it bio, and there is another particular type. And what were they doing? They would cut this into logs, transport to Kampala, they are cleared, and they are exported. Majority of them were being sent to, a lot of these logs were being sent to either Thailand or Vietnam. And do you know the people involved? Highly placed people. And I can tell you a story. I almost lost my life trying to fight this. Armed men. And these are trucks that are being escorted by armed people, security people. Because a truck of logs would be sold in Kampala. I'm told they were selling it $10,000 a truck. And do you know what it would take? Some of these trees, you don't find them in other parts of the country. Just 2 trees are enough to be cut into a full truck. And these are not small trucks. Trees that you and I can join our hands and we don't all drown. So northern Uganda was targeted. And I can tell you there are people I know. There are people who call me to threaten me. I even reported some of the cases, including to the 4th Division Barracks. I went and reported because there were army people involved. So then you ask whether you are going to succeed in the fight. So yes, the president has taken a positive step, a good step. But this is something that should have been done that time when the destruction was even more severe.
Some could say better late than never.
Well, better late, but never, honestly. I just think we need to get serious about their laws. We need to implement them. We need to, even now, when the president has issued this directive, there are trucks moving every day. And you know what has happened? They have only changed their tactics. Now they are not using the lorries. They are using boxer body trucks. So you cannot see them. You think these are trucks either from South Sudan or from where, well covered, protected. You don't see it. They end up where? In Kampala. Others go to Kenya. Okay? So even when the president has issued directives, these things are still going on. So that brings us to the question of sustainability. Again, as Dr. E has mentioned, you see, the step the president has taken is good, but we need to go a lot deeper and come up with something that is more sustainable. Because the demand for charcoal in this country will continue. I think we are likely to take even more than 20 years, unless we come with alternative measures.
And we're going to come to that. Let me ask you, you are the politician, these are academics, and then runs an agency. Will this hold?
Do you know what we did? Let me tell you this. In northern Uganda, when we started this fighting, we realized it was risky. We said, okay, if the law enforcement agencies are not helping much, and I remember Mr. Okello, with the help of the Environmental Protection Police, I actually wrote to him and he sent manpower, and they did a commendable job. But you see, when the forces are too many and all that, even the NFA people get overwhelmed. So what did we do? We said, look, yes, there is the short term. We are trying to stop this, just like what the president is doing. What the president is doing, the directive, is short term. We need to look far, sustainably. Because the question is, if we have about 65 or 70% of Ugandans relying on this, what are the alternative energy sources? So what we did, like that time at local government level, one was to mobilize all the local governments together and say, can we, apart from making sure these laws are worked on, can we come with ordinances? We worked with different groups, environmentalists, and started the process of coming with. And then we said, what about looking at alternative ways? We even went as far as engaging people to look at fast-growing trees. And we said, why don't we, because we are not about to stop this, why don't we protect the indigenous tree species while getting into what we call charcoal farming? So you get fast-growing trees, including bamboo and the rest, plant them deliberately for charcoal while protecting the indigenous. We say, can we look at this option? And then we went a step further and said, can we get partners who can come into making things like, more effective energy saving stuff, and then coming up with briquettes. We were working with a company called Kijani, they're in Gulo. I think they're the biggest briquette makers, and they grow their own trees, fast growing.
Honorable, let's hold on the solutions. I'm going to come back to you on that one. Let me bring in Professor Sarah. Professor, you and I had this discussion over the weekend and exchanged texts there. But I've been to Kalangala, I've seen how bad it is. I've seen what the RDC is doing, trying to stop people from carrying charcoal all the way to the LC1. What challenges do you see with especially this executive order, and can it be feasible? Can it really tantamount to anything?
Thank you, Timothy, and good evening, our viewers. I think the executive order came because of the failure of very many other orders before that the Honorable Mapenduzi has explained. And, it is shocking that even after the Acholi bylaw, you remember the Acholi bylaw on charcoal, it's called the Acholi Sustainable Charcoal Production Law of 2019, which actually tried to stipulate what trees do you cut some, leave some species, which amount, how do we organize people into a charcoal cooperative, and all of that. And it was really not to say, don't cut, but can we do it in a more sustainable way? So if even after that, the issue failed to be resolved, it becomes a challenge. I know the president has the mandate and the power to do that, but as you've explained, it is the issue of enforcement. First of all, before this problem became a problem, there were laws, okay? Those laws got reinforced with more ordinances, local government ordinances and bylaws and policies. And I think even before COVID, we used to have a charcoal conference per year in Acholi sub-regions. Yes, to try and raise awareness of this plight and bring everybody on board. That didn't work until recently when the president made this order. Okay, we thought that because of presidential power, it will hold. And I thought it was holding until I came today to I've just learned that in spite of that, still there are violations occurring. So I think it means well. It has the power of the president behind it. But I think there are real challenges why these violations keep occurring. First and foremost, charcoal is very lucrative, particularly in northern Uganda, charcoal or Kalangala. Of course, biomass is cheaper to produce, and I think the whole issue has been that alternatives are very expensive. So you've had everyone explain that we have a high population growth rate, we have high levels of urbanization, we have so many demands for these biomass fuels. And some years back, another person who worked with us at Makere, Adam Branch, wrote an article, you can even Google it down online. It's called Charcoal Power, the Political Violence of Non-Fossil Fuels. And the article and the research just focused on the trucks leaving the north, or like you're talking about now, Kalangala. I think we need to look at the drivers of these things. Maybe people just don't want to defy, but probably they are real drivers. As we've heard for the big time people, you find that the drivers are the fact that it pays. It's very lucrative to cut down these trees and export them. And as he said, some are going to Thailand, they are going to very far countries. So that is a real cost driver. And with our privatized economy, where there's not much institutional mechanisms of controlling the tree cutting, I don't know how many, maybe Mr. Kello will tell us how many forest rangers we have positioned to manage. In the past, by the way, before we went neoliberal, these officers were there. Government used to deploy them. We don't know how many they are there to guard these trees, to guard these forests against violations like tree cutting. So that's the cost driver. And maybe you're talking about the ones being exported. The ones being felled for logging or for charcoal are also other. There's not much enforcement and not much in terms of forest rangers. I think they're called forest rangers who would have protected the forests against these violations. The other cost drivers on a smaller scale, for now those of us who are here, is the high cost of alternative fuel to charcoal. Electricity is very expensive. You cannot cook with it all the time. Gas is very expensive. Not many households can afford. Poverty itself is another big driver of these violations, because you know there are those big kilns of charcoal burning, but you also find small ones because everyone is relying on that. Now, poverty does two things. It makes people find this to be the cheaper option, but it also creates an inducement for people to cut trees, burn charcoal so as to make money. In some of the villages that you'll find, for example, in the east, which is not very pronounced, you find the remaining trees that are remaining on people's gardens have to be guarded day and night. Because if you leave your garden for a few hours, another villager will cut down the tree. Or even just 2 days if you don't visit your shamba, that tree will be gone. And you will not know who took it, because you are all relatives on the same village. So poverty is a real cost driver. Population and urbanization is a cost driver. The lack of controls, the lack of forest rangers is another big driver. And the fact that the alternatives are too expensive. Until we subsidize the price of fuel in terms of maybe electricity, gas, but of course there are also these things which are being talked about, the briquettes and the rest and the solars. We need to look into the cost of mounting those kinds of alternatives. Because without them and with the poor population which is growing by the day, as they have said rightfully so, this problem is going to continue. Not because people intended to defy presidential orders, but just the normal dictates of life. Thank you.
And looking at this directive, what is the intended achievement? What does government or the president intend to achieve with such a directive given, especially on timber and charcoal?
I think the directive was well intentioned, and the intention was to try, as you've heard, to protect the tree cover. We need to remember the context in which this directive arose, because there was a real plea to him directly at a particular function, at a particular moment, that this is happening. But even before that plea, there had been a lot of incidences where, as the Honorable has said, people come in and cut. But also these incidences were creating a reaction, which reaction, if unchecked, actually could spell doom for some people. We saw images on TV where people were being flogged, people were being caned for coming all the way from the central, deep into the north, to cut trees. And we also need to know that these things are not just economic things. They are also cultural artifacts. People have certain kind of relationships, social relationships and engagements with the environment and whichever parts of the environment. So I think that becomes easier for people to be mobilized, to say, you know, this is our heritage, which is going. And so there's real pain from the environmental scientific side, but there's also real pain from the social cultural perspective. And because these trees give certain things, for example, if you're talking about the shea nut oil and what shea nut oil and shea nut butter means in a particular social cultural setting. So if people imagine that there will be a moment without that, then it becomes very normal and very natural that people will fight to at least protect the shea nut trees. We know how long they take to grow. We know that they're among the things which are being felled mercilessly. So there are these things. So there is a whole context. The president didn't just wake up overnight and create this ban. It was a direct plea made to him at that moment in time. And this direct plea came from concerted efforts of engagement, but also of concern of what the carnage we are seeing in the northern region means, both economically, socioculturally, and the long-term consequences of deforestation in that area.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Mr. Okello. Yes, Honorable.
I just wanted to add something to what Professor said. Again, when you look at the structure set at, let's say, at local government level, you have one officer who is called the forest officer, and then you have probably one officer who is called the forest guard. In most districts, there are not more than 3 officers. In most districts. Majority of the districts, they are either 2 or 1.
And they are guarding acres.
And in many districts, you find there is only one officer called the forest officer. And most of these officers are the least funded. Go to any local government, go to any government department, see how much money is put to support that department or sector. It's not there. So that explains. But again, that has made these officers to become a problem themselves. Because then they are also now involved in either issuing documents that are illegal, or conniving with the dealers to give them way to continue with maneuvering, committing those illegalities. So there is also that problem of the structural setup, the officers, the people who are supposed to be there. And just as she said, yes, the president took a good decision, but there are people who are failing the president. There are people who are supposed to implement these directives. There are laws. There are people who are supposed to enforce these laws. What are they doing? Does it require the president to issue a directive when there are laws and there are people who are paid to do this job? That is where the problem comes from.
Well, thank you very much, Honorable. Mr. Okello, when you look at this executive order, what is your understanding of it? But also, where is your mandate in this executive order to implement?
The executive order, to me, is in very good faith. First of all, it has already stopped impunity. What was happening in northern Uganda was just impunity. Where you go to a village, you find the whole woodland is full of people using different types of machines, cutting all kinds of trees of all sizes and putting heaps. Some heaps, I don't know, could have been about 100 meters long, heaped about 2 meters high, stacked to be fired and burnt. So as I talk now, that impunity has stopped. So that is one good thing which has come out of the order. Honorable Mapinduzi has already talked about people changing from open trucks to box bodies. Why are they doing that? They are fearing the executive order. So they are now stealing. They are not moving openly the way they have been doing. And the way the order, especially as far as timber is concerned, was very clear. The president did not stop completely. It was very clear that value-added timber is allowed. Value-added and from sustainable sources, not from the natural forest. Because I think the president was aware that we have farmers here, commercial tree farmers, who have produced a lot of forest. I have, for example, Nile ply, which has over 25,000 hectares of planted forest, planted by them, 100%. And they have mills here. There is a mill in Jinja, another mill in Nakasongola. So the president is saying, where you are adding value and also to sustainable source. We also have plantations which are certified under the international standards because they meet all the requirements of a sustainable forestry. So these ones, according to the president's executive order, they are not banned. They are allowed because they are from sustainable source and they are adding value. They are not exporting raw timber. The president is saying, why don't you make furniture? Why don't you do plywood, for example? Because you have already added value and you are attracting value-added tax, and therefore Uganda will benefit from it. Now, One thing which probably I need us to reflect on as far as charcoal is concerned. Under the National Development Plan 3, the government through the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development set up a very ambitious target of reducing the traditional use of biomass as a primary source of our energy from 90% at that time when they were doing the baseline, when we were doing NDP3, we were at 90%. So government set up a target of reducing it to 50%. What is the implication of this? At that time, we were using up to 45 million tons of biomass energy per year. 45 million tons. Now, reducing it to 50%, government had envisaged to reduce it to about 26 million tons, which is the sustainable level. Our sustainable level at that time was calculated to be at 26 million tons per annum. But we were using 45 million tons, which was very, very unsustainable. If I'm to do a very simple calculation, 45 million tons, assuming a tree is half a ton, that means you are burning 90 million trees in a year. Now, if I do a simple arithmetic of just plantation forest, where we are putting 1,000 trees in an hectare, 90 million trees, that is 90,000 hectares of planted forest, which we are burning every year. So now, if you put it in terms of money for raising, for producing that to that time when you are ready to harvest, so that's a lot of money. So to me, the executive order is in very good faith, and we must implement it. The Prime Minister has given guidelines on how it should be implemented. We still have challenges because right now we have a stockpile of charcoal in northern Uganda. Stockpile. If you go to my office, in my regional office in Gulu, I have no space. I have no space. The whole, and it is a very big compound. It is in a forest. It is occupied of impounded charcoal. Impounded charcoal. And what do we do with the charcoal? So I'm also aware there are people who are appealing that, why don't you give us some time? We first ferry what we had already burnt, because after all it is already burnt. We ferry them and then now you can stop. So those are issues which we are seeing. And how sure are we that if we allow you to ferry, you are not going back to cut more?
But Mr. Okelo, the way you understand the executive order, is it the same way your officers understand the executive order on its implementation? Because they're the people on the ground. Do they understand how to implement it alongside the law?
How do you understand it, if I may ask?
Because two areas that the president stressed. One was charcoal, but we didn't talk about the alternative. The value addition is a good idea. But what are they implementing? What do they understand by this executive order alongside the law for them to be able to guide the citizens on what direction we're taking?
The order was fairly long because the president even gave guidance on how, for example, he acknowledged that there may be this small-scale farmer who wants to remove some trees because he wants to open his land for pasture, for example, for the animals. Because if you are to do livestock rearing, where there are many trees in your private land, you cannot get grass. The grass cannot grow because of the shade. So the president gave guidance and said, yes, this person may want to remove some trees, not all trees, some trees. But also he may want to remove and think of adding value by burning charcoal. So he gave guidance on how that should be implemented through the office of the Resident District Commissioner and the minister responsible for water and environment. So he gave guidance on that. What the president is burning is impunity, large scale, where you go, you are cutting acreage and 10 hectares, and then you are burning everywhere. By the way, large-scale charcoal production also attracts an EIA. You're supposed to do an environmental and social impact assessment.
Yes.
You're not just supposed to go and cut. But people, I think, either they were not informed or, but they say ignorance is no defense in law. But that is it. But also the other thing I need to bring probably for attention of our viewers is that the charcoal production system which we have now is very, very unsustainable. It is at only about 10% efficiency. What does that mean? If you burn 100 kilograms of raw logs, you're only getting 10%, which is 10 kilograms of charcoal. The 90 kilogram goes to ash and smoke, and it is wasted. Honorable Mapenduza has talked about some initiative which was being implemented in Gulu when he was there. It started when he was the chairman, but we are still continuing with it by Kijani. Kijani is one of the CBOs. We are working with them together with the Food and Agriculture Organization to try to pilot a sustainable charcoal production system. But we are not only looking at Gulu, we are looking at other districts in the Kato corridor to see how we can increase the output from the 10% to at least about that minimum of 30%, so that we can at least get more charcoal from that. And they are looking at sustainable woodland management for charcoal production. We have been there, and I'm a member of the steering committee. It is something which we have seen working. But unfortunately, you know, we want quick money. We may not be patient enough, because what Kijani is doing, they are saying, first leave this tree to grow. You don't cut everything. We are seeing these charcoal producers, for them they cut everything, the small ones, the big ones.
Including the stump.
Including, some of them are even uprooting the stumps.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me bring in Dr. Chizito. Doctor, is it possible to balance development, national development for the economy alongside environmental conservation, and how can it be done?
Thank you, moderator, and once again, good evening, our viewers, for sticking to the program. You talked about development and the balance. So many things can be done, but let's start at the smallest unit. What my colleague here said, that is 10% efficiency, that is production efficiency. Then we come to the use efficiency. Even the use efficiency is less than 10%. The gadgets we are using to recover the energy in charcoal that we have lost already, 90% of it, we are even losing more. But how do we balance? I think the balancing would be, and this could operationalize the policy we have on renewable energies, is to, I think there's been selective pressure on natural forests or on wooded biomass to be the main source of energy. And yet there could be other alternatives. For example, we've been doing a lot of research on alternatives. There are communities that don't have forests, and but yet they are into so much of agricultural production. There's a lot of biomass in waste, agro-processing waste, in the form of crop residues. Look at the rice growing areas. The rice husks is so much. The peanut, the coffee processing, the maize processing, all of that. Now, the balance is where government should deliberately commit to providing technologies. They can start at a very appropriate level. We make them appropriate to the community need of densifying, okay, these biomass wastes that have a good energy content into solids that are similar to charcoal. That is one way. And when you look at that route of using agricultural wastes, I think Uganda, the last I read from the statistics, we have an annual of around 500 million tons of crop residues. So if we go that way, we could replace the demand for wood, for solid fuels, by almost a good percentage, maybe 30%. Then also to balance, we need to look at, yes, I like this picture. We need to look at, I was talking of efficiency. We need to look at how can government subsidize, I don't like subsidies, but how can government, come up with, maybe there could be private public partnerships. I know they are cook stoves, and this is not a subject we can delve in because they are variant. Most of them are called improved, and they're not improved at all. But how can we then cut down on more losses? We have lost in the conversion to charcoal. How can we have better efficient systems? And I'll tell you an example that there's biogas. I don't know, maybe Honorable Mapinduzi here will say there's a time when government was onto biogas as one form of cheap renewables, but there's a tendency for government not sticking on something for so long. So, and this is going down to the commitment. If there is commitment, and more so now that there's a directive, when you give a directive, you have to give an enabling environment, an escape route. That is what I was saying, that with no escape route, the community is not well prepared. It's going to be, blood or energy. So there are alternatives. I mean, we can do biogas. We have a lot of municipal waste that is causing a lot of hazards within the rapidly urbanizing communities. We all know what Chitezi is suffering from. If there is a commitment that landfills can also have appropriate technologies to utilize that waste and recover the energy there. Okay. Those are some of the alternatives. And I think policy, I know that there are many policies, there are many acts, but coordination of policy is really not giving a clear directive of where to go. What has been actually negating private efforts to invest in sustainable charcoal production or any other renewables is the lack of regulation of pricing. I have invested in kilns. The company talked about that was trying to produce briquettes, and then I'm competing with illegal products that flood the market, no market regulation. The incentive for me to invest is being killed. And then the risk perceived on my return of investment is to the roof. This is why many initiatives to provide alternatives. I know that Sweden at one point, through Busoga Forest Company, Busoga Forest Company is a big company similar to Nyopra. They have planted a lot. They wanted to produce, they imported even kilns. I think
Doctor, let's come back to that one when we come to alternatives.
Okay.
Honorable Mpenduzi, this is not the first executive order. There was one banning people from growing things or harvesting sand from wetlands. There was also one banning Balaro from moving to the northern corridor there. Is this achievable? He talks about 40 companies. He talks about suspending licenses, His Excellency. Do the people understand the trickle-down effect of this order, or are we going to have just a nice narrative that goes around and later on we stop there?
There are two sides here. On the one side, there are people who give out their land to have the trees cut down. There are also people who get involved themselves, the owners of the land, in cutting down the trees, burning charcoal, and waiting for people to buy. That's one side. The other side is the demand side. The business people who travel from every part of Uganda, from Gulu to the rural areas and all that, to go and buy, buying in large quantity. And by the way, there were, when we were trying to deal with this problem a few years ago, we realized there were some industries, factories in
which
Jinja,
are being powered
in Jinja, which were being powered
the charcoal.
by charcoal. And most of these trucks would go to them, supplying them. And we said, why do we allow such a factory to continue operating with the kind of destruction it's causing? Because even if they're paying taxes, what they're leaving behind is more severe. So there are two sides. And you see, if we want to deal with this, we need to look at both sides. How do we deal with the question of people who think that is the only way to have food on the table? When we're struggling to stop people from doing that, some of them would say, I am doing this to send my child to school. I am doing this because I want to buy books, I want to do this, I want to do this. They have their own justifications. And the question is, the bottom line is poverty. And you see, the areas that are having this serious destruction are again the same areas that are considered to be extremely poor. So as we deal with the question of stopping, we should also look at what alternative sources of production do we provide? If we engage people into productive activities where they're able to earn some money and you know, make a living for themselves, they will be engaged in that and start to live this. But because they think that is the only available activity that can make quick cash, they then concentrate on that. So the question of poverty needs to be addressed. How do we engage our population? How do we make deliberate efforts to change the story, the question of saying this is the most poorest part? So that is key, because we are going to continue having the same problem as long as people think that is the only way to make quick money and have a living. The other thing that we need to also look at is how do we make systems work? Because you see, why I feel sad is that people do not want to do their part. And so the president every time is being overburdened. He needs to issue directive and all that. Local governments, you know, a lot of this can be sorted out by local governments. And by the way, when you look at NFA here, NFA does not have mandate on local forest reserves.
No.
It is not their mandate. In these villages where the destruction is taking place, it is not within the mandate of NFA.
It's mandate of local government.
It is the mandate of the local government entities. Unfortunately, many local governments consider that to be the most effective, you know, source of revenue. So they think that is where they can get money. Now, as long as local governments look at that as their source of revenue, the problem is far from being sorted. So we need to make sure local governments do the right thing, they stick to what the law requires, and they implement it. But also the local governments have to be a lot more creative. Because you see, as you're implementing the law and you're doing this, you also need to look at how do we creatively provide solutions to some of these issues so that life continues. But now it looks like many local governments want to just sit and wait from government. What are they doing? That is the question.
Okay. Allow me to bring in Professor before we take a break. Professor, a population that is growing at 3.2%, 75% under the age of 15, strictly dependents there. When you look at this, the demand is higher than the supply, hence the deforestation that is happening at a rapid force. How do we bring a balancing act here?
Well, that's going to be very complicated. I think, like you said, people need to be made aware of the consequences of what they are engaged in. And I can just give an example. If you go to the east, particularly those eastern districts that neighbor Karamoja, like Ulambuli, in the past, we used to have the Karamojong winds. They're almost like harmattan in Western Africa. That would blow from, I think, at the beginning of the year, but end like in February, and stop at the trading center after Kapchora, that's Buyaga. Right now, because every tree was cleared, those winds will blow up to Pasironko, these are miles, and they will stay for 4 or 5 months. And once those winds are on, nothing can grow because they literally carry everything. They carry dust, they carry rubbish, they carry plants, they carry trees, they carry everything. So I think people need to be made aware of the consequences of what they are engaged in. But now, but again, who would have sensitized them? It's the forest rangers and the forestry infrastructure. We don't have them because we haven't found it wise to bolster that kind of human resource. But we really need them. If they were on ground, like you know how we talk about extension workers for agriculture, you need those kind of people to provide extension support for people to understand the forests. That is one. The other thing is the whole issue of power and powerlessness. If the locals are going to buy into the idea of not cutting trees because they're important, when other people are going to drive miles to clear what these people have preserved for years in 1 week, then there's no incentive for the locals to also look at this as a cultural resource that they have to preserve, that they have to be interested in. Because remember, those who are coming with better equipment. It works faster, but also with more protection, including guns. So that becomes a challenge. I think it now goes back to the whole issue of policy coordination. but also sensitization. I know there are quite a number of individuals through NGOs that are into reforestation, that are planting trees of food value to try and give people more interest in looking at this tree, not just as something not to care about, but something that can give us food. But also, I think that is working, but they're not working very fast, because you see, you're talking about avocados, you're talking about mangoes, and now those trees cannot do what the big natural forest cover was doing. So if you've depleted your forest cover and largely, yes, and largely created a desert or a semi-desert or say a semi-arid place, the mango trees will not hold, the avocados will not hold, everything will not hold. Maybe you'll just have grass for pasture, which will come, and when the first sun rays comes, they will dry up. So I think people need to be sensitized, but I think we need a whole value chain from government level to say, what do we need to do? The importance of that value chain would show us what we need to preserve or conserve, but will also show us how best to mitigate this kind of things. I know the alternative methods we are talking about are good, but these alternative methods require a lot of investment in them. I mean, you just need to count what does the government invest into producing power, but also maintaining the lines. You see, energy production is not just installing the infrastructure. It is also maintaining it for years. You can just see what is happening in South Africa with ESCOM, which has managed for long. So this thing requires, so if someone is going to go into solar, someone is going to go into biogas, they will still remain the small things at household level. But we need to think of a way we can escalate that to production at a higher level. Like some countries have windmills. Okay, for us it might not be windmills, but what is it that we can do if we are generating a lot of biomass in terms of matoke consumption, landfills and the rest? How can that be efficiently produced? And will the government be able to buy it from the private developer? Because private developers don't go into these things because of the fear that if they overproduce, no one will buy it. That's why you find mission hospitals produce their power and it stops there. Private farms produce their power and industries produce their power and it stops there. So we need a whole value chain thinking of things.
Thank you very much. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be discussing this ban both on timber and charcoal, but now we'll be discussing alternatives and solutions, especially for an ordinary Ugandan. One of the drivers is poverty, and we need to find a solution to that.
BIOMAS. Nsobola okusasula ne momo?
No.
Ha. Hey, nsobola okusasula ne momo? Ha.
Yino merchant code yaffe.
Oh, kirungi.
Sebo meka?
Ebiri. Nyabo, nsobola okusasula ne momo?
Bambi nedda.
Ha. Baby, tuve wano.
Mukibango okusasula ne MTN Momo kigirako emigaso mingi n'egisingako eri buli omu, tekikola makulu okubanga tugirina.
Hello, nkimye rent.
Nsobola okusasula ne momo? Ha.
Yes, osobola.
Sasula obaggula ne MTN Momo olwo tukuddize ssente oleweeki ya bwereere. Kozesa Momo app obanyiga *155*3#.
Juko. Yo. Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Each Introducing the Infinix Note 30 series in partnership with Airtel Uganda, a smartphone where style meets functionality. Take charge of the day with special features like the 108MP triple camera and 68 watts first charge, and the best part is you can use this phone to charge other phones. You also will enjoy free 3GB from Airtel every month for 3 months on each new device purchased. Dial *100#, select data and devices to get your free data. The Infinix Note 30 series Spark, a connection in partnership with Airtel, a reason to imagine.
Uganda's oil and gas activities are undertaking international best practice standards in order to continuously ensure coexistence between the oil activities and Uganda's rich biodiversity. Following the award of the Environment and Social Impact Assessment certificates for the Kingfisher, Tilenga, and East African crude oil pipeline projects, various environmental and social management plans have also been developed to ensure sustainable development of the projects. The Petroleum Authority of Uganda is working with other regulatory bodies to monitor all oil and gas activities to enhance compliance and environment protection during oil activities. The Petroleum Authority of Uganda, creating lasting value in Uganda's oil journey.
Are you tired of high fees and slow transfer time when sending money? Airtel Money is here to revolutionize the way you move your money. We have revised our rates back to ground. Sending money from Airtel to other networks in Uganda, East Africa, and to the rest of the world has never been more affordable. Dial *185# and start sending money. Switch to Airtel Money today and experience unbeatable rates and top-notch services for all your local and international money transfer needs. Airtel Money, instant, secure, borderless.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. I'm joined by Professor Sarah Sali. I'm joined by Honorable Ojara Martin Mapenduzi. I'm also joined by Dr. Simon Chizito. And lastly, I'm also joined by Mr. Tom Okello, who is the Executive Director of the National Forestry Authority. Let me read some of your messages that have come through here. Farouk writes in from Masaka, says, banning charcoal is typically a case of putting the cart before the horse, and elitist approach to policy making. No tangible effort has been made for the poor to access electricity. So what are the alternatives, especially to ordinary folk? Thank you very much. Michael, watching from Kabira Maido, says, this is a good topic. Let the power tariffs be reduced, made cheaper for Ugandans to use. Once the alternatives to charcoal are cheaper, then trees will be saved. The higher electricity tariffs are, that's why charcoal is used highly. Okay. Someone from Yumbe says, thank you for the show. We have 3 challenges. NFA is logged on all the big trees in K forest. Failure to implement the ban. Lack of substitution to the biomass. Hosting refugees have also made the situation worse. Okay. This one is quite long, but I'll pick out a few that are there. He sends a message coming in from Gulu and says, I'm anxious to listen to the panelists on what Parliament and other desk occupants are saying in the research and development to turn around technology for cooking alternatives. I'm also surprised the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development is not part of the panel. We actually invited the Ministry of Water and Environment, but he lost someone and couldn't make it here. Finally, this is also to Honorable Mapenduzi. The Acholi region at one time had charcoal farming bylaws and ordinances, which were consistent with the number of trees cutting and charcoal. The number of trees. How has the innovation evolved and progressed despite the challenges? India has a lot of biomass plants that can be used as waste from the markets and the streets, which were dumped in Kitezi. Any few enterprises have to use the gasified biomass plants, but that's a concept that is unknown to us. This is John Abaho from Chengera town. I'll leave them at that and then pick up the conversation here in the studio. Let me start with you, Dr. Chizito.
Yes.
What are the alternatives? I know you are behind some of the innovations, and one of the things that I'm excited about, especially when academics like you and Professor come around, is to give us what you're doing as innovations at Makerere to be able to stop this. Tariff of power, we have 1,300 megawatts, only consuming about 800 megawatts. Power is expensive, between 50 and 80 watts there. That's the most expensive one there. Homes are paying about 700 shillings per unit. So what alternatives do you have? Power is expensive, charcoal is becoming a problem, biogas is not an easy thing. What alternatives have you, and what are you innovating?
Okay, thank you, our audience, for listening, and thank you, moderator. There are many alternatives. We shall make segments which alternative is appropriate to which segment. Okay, I want to start at the household level. The household level, the alternatives could be biogas. Biogas, from what we have done before, since I have a platform now to talk about the innovations we have done as Makerere, the initial cost of putting a domestic biogas tank that is about 6 cubic meters, the initial cost will be around 1.2 million. But the return on investment after 3 years covers that cost. And that cost will go into building a cement and brick digester. But now there are alternatives. We can go in for, there's cheap alternatives from China and elsewhere, from India. We can have just PVC tubes that are on surface, half covered, or we can use a PVC tank. So the cost of digester construction is going lower and lower. Now I'm looking at households that can have pigs, poultry, that can have cattle. The manure is always there if the animals are there. And then maybe the burden of a little water for diluting the manure, and then you'll have biogas, which is a clean in terms of the combustion gases are almost halved compared to using charcoal and firewood. So that, if you read, is NSV has been popularizing that, UNDP, and we have done a lot of research on which substrates and which mixtures will give you the optimal biogas mixes. So that is at household level. The other alternative is, my colleague here was asking how we can harness agricultural residues, and this is an appropriate avenue for agronomy-based families in the rural areas. You have winnowed the beans, the peas, the peas, and whatever. If there is a way of, and there is a way, we have trained people on making small scale with Joakali kind of machines to compress. Some of them we use an hydraulic jack, which can cost about 70 and is handheld. We have ones that you can, the mortar and brick making machine, we can modify that to produce briquettes. And at household level that can suffice. Now going to enterprise level, the small enterprise level, like milling, community mills, like milling grain, milling just to produce food, we can go solar. Now I know that solar is also deemed as expensive, but at enterprise level, the break-even point can be achieved because you can have a centralized facility, and everyone that's coming to mill is paying a small what? Tariffs. I think in northern Uganda, Honorable, you can attest those have been very, very common. So we have been doing a lot in terms of research. Now I want to say the innovations that we have done. If you go to Rwenzori area, our products are there. We have been popularizing solar dryers for drying food, for drying coffee, and they are working. The problem with solar or some of these alternatives is that they are better at communal level. Coffee farmers who have a burden of drying coffee for longer, they can come together and then put some little money in a dryer. We have designed dryers that can go to a unit cost of 10 million. Because coffee is a high value product. In the north, we have put those from Ukene and cassava and so forth. So we have done some quite good research on harnessing solar energy and solar drying. I've already talked about biogas. Now, I want now to go to the briquettes, that everyone is almost an anthem for everyone. We make briquettes. Briquettes just provide an alternative, but they're not so much of a clean energy. You need to design systems that makes them to burn cleanly, make the combustion more efficient so that you can reduce on the particulates and you can reduce on the emissions. One thing we should know that as we are all consuming charcoal, charcoal is also very poisonous. The greenhouse emissions are so many. But anyway, there's a saying that a poor man, the primary need is the basic need for them. We can find a way of making some of these gases diluted when a person in the village is cooking, but right now we are looking at how can a household get food ready on the table with the cheapest means possible. Okay? So this is where briquettes come in. Now briquettes, there are communities that don't have trees, most of the western area in Wushenyi. And sometimes you have to forego a portion of matoke to raise money to buy fuel. And when matoke is in plenty, you have to sell several batches before you buy a small quantity of energy. Now, for those people, we have done research that they can use the pseudo stems, for example. They can use the banana peelings. All they need is to crush to reduce the size and get something to bind. And there are lessons and we can pick in India. People just get animal dung, just mold it with their hands and bake it, and in the evening they are using it. So if it is that level that we have zero alternatives, that can be an alternative.
Can that cook beans?
Yeah, yes. Very hot, by the way.
It can cook beans.
But not the kind of our dry beans.
Yeah, we should change our cooking.
Exactly, yeah. Professor, you talked about sensitization.
Yeah. Yes.
The issue of energy is about the product that you're going to use to derive energy, but also is affected by other intricate things that need sensitization. You know, why do you cook dry beans when you can soak them? They use the fuel use pattern. All those are issues that need.
But doctor, there's also the whole issue of, apart from the beans, and by the many areas now don't eat beans because they don't have fuel. But there's also the issue, like we cook with matoke, then you have to cook it for a very long time for it to get. Can you comment on that?
Yes. Now I'm moving on to higher levels, like Professor was saying, that how can we upscale? Now biomass. We are lucky in Uganda that we have a lot of biomass in crop residues. We can go the India way. We can purposefully grow crops for attaining energy from them. In Sweden and other parts, they have done a lot of tree breeding of willows. They grow willows, and then most of you have seen them. Then they come and harvest everything, crush it, and make pellets, and they put in their boilers. So at industrial level, like the factory that was using charcoal, I think those are scrap, metal scrap industries, because charcoal is a good reducing agent for the people in the metallurgy. But at industrial level, we can, and Chinyara is doing this, and some tea companies, we can have crop residues like sugarcane bagasse, sawdust, which are waste abandoned from timber conversion processes, from sugar milling processes, and we do what is called cogeneration. We get these waste, okay, combust them and recover the heat to heat water, and then we have steam power that we can use to run turbines, and then we eventually have process energy. So that route of cogeneration can be, we start with biomass, which is waste biomass, for example. It can be market waste, it can be chitezi waste that is filling up there, and we just need a technology where we can combust that, and we don't lose so much heat to the open, but recover that heat, channel it in heating water, then we get steam, and then we feed that to the steam turbine, and then we can generate electricity. I think for sustainability issues and issues of policy, there's been so much focus of energy transition based on hydroelectricity. Now, like Professor Sally said, our systems are centralized systems. You produce hydropower in Karuma or Jinja, but then you have to transmit it
To the national grid.
to the national grid. Imagine producing in Jinja, and then you want to connect in Nebi. The unit cost that you said is going higher and higher is borne by the cost of transmission and the cost of distribution, and then the operational management of all that value chain. So I think...
But Doctor, you see, a person watching us there, you're giving us enterprise roles. Simplify it for me. I am living in an urban area, or I'm in the village.
Okay.
How do I leave Chaco, and what is my alternative? What can I do? Because I want to be part of the solution.
Okay, now I'm going to define you as an individual living in an urban environment. When you live in an urban environment, what is surrounding you? If you are living in an urban environment and you are doing backyard husbandry for poultry or livestock, okay, you have a raw material there, which is manure or dung, that you could harness, okay? And there are advantages to that. If you are living on a small plot of land in Kampala, there are sanitation issues, there are smell nuisance to the neighbors that maybe will say, you know. So you harness that and into biogas production. So the issue with biogas, we have, over time, the technology has evolved. It is present to communities that have already adopted. You turn the knob as if you're turning the normal LPG gas. So if you are that kind of urban dweller, you're doing backyard agriculture, you have manure that you can convert to. Look at it this way. You're an urban dweller that can afford a 5,000 liter PVC tank to harvest rainwater. It is the same cost that you can use to buy a digester, and then you can. But you know, when you buy that and protect it very well, it can take a recycle time of 5 years before it is damaged or needs to be replaced. So you have a cheaper source continuously for 5 years. So in the 5 years, you recoup the initial investment in the whole system. And the supply chains now allow the connector pipes are there and what. So I have moved on to another person who is not like you, that you are doing backyard agriculture. You are one that is living with a large family and you have all this organic waste.
Okay, Doctor, let's put it there. Let me bring in Mr. Okello a bit. Mr. Okello, if we go down this road that we're going to, the end is not really hopeful. It's very hopeless down there. What implications do you see if we keep at it? And what is NFA helping in solution-oriented ways to reduce deforestation, to also reduce on the charcoal usage within our homes?
I think, let me start by reflecting on what Professor Sally and Honorable Mapenduzi talked about at the beginning, when they were talking about a total ban now may not be feasible. Because I remember they are saying we must think about an affordable, an efficient, unacceptable alternative. They said it at the beginning, before you think of banning it totally. If I look at the NDP 3 again, where government committed to reducing the dependency on biomass from 89% to 50% by 2025. What does that mean? It means that at least about 50% of our population, or of the people who have been using it, will still be using it. So what do we do now? So to me, yes, we are discussing alternatives, which we must go to. It is a must, because what we are doing now is not sustainable. But we should not just brush away or wash away the issues of biomass. It is not yet about to go. We need well-thought, well-articulated interventions, which will possibly make us address the challenges which the use of biomass is bringing on the environment, but also we must look at opportunities which it can bring for us. The doctor here has talked about other biomass which we can use. You know, there are people who have approached me and are thinking of, why don't we plant? Especially when this ban was put. People are now looking at, why don't we go for energy plantations, where you plant fast-growing trees.
They call it charcoal farming.
Charcoal farming, where you are doing charcoal farming. And if you plant fast-growing trees, probably in the next 5 years, you'll start harvesting. And when you harvest, you can even have appropriate technology where you can, after carbonizing, using that efficient stoves, I mean it cleans, not this open air. And then you can even carbonize further and go into making briquettes, which has more energy. So these are, and then why don't we also probably do reforestation and restoration of some of these degraded areas? Because we cannot, as a country now, I look at how we are, our consumption level. I think we cannot just wake up and say tomorrow, let nobody use charcoal or biomass. What will that old woman in the village use? So to me, I look at, we must have very candid discussion. You know, globally people are talking about transition from the fossil fuels to electric cars to other fuels, other biofuels like ethanols and others. Why don't we have the same discussion with the charcoal? I mean, with biomass. We need to have that discussion on how do we transition to the clean energy sources, which we have. There are too many. And in Uganda, we are endowed. We can go solar. We have a lot of hydropower. But
we have peat. And
we have biogas. We can do biogas. So these are feasible alternatives. But Professor Sali has said it needs initial investment. For example, LPG. If we start getting our gas from the Albertine Rift, and I mean our oil, and then we have that gas, I think we can, as a country, when we have gas here, we are producing it in Uganda, possibly the price will come down to a half of what we have now. And the moment it comes to a half, it would be cheaper to use gas rather than using charcoal. It would be more efficient. But just like a doctor has said, we need to change our consumption patterns. We need a mindset change. How do you boil matoke in the morning and you keep it on fire to eat for dinner in the evening? You have put fuel there for the whole day. And then you start saying, fuel is expensive. You are wasting it.
What is the alternative?
Of matoke? You boil and go and eat. You don't need to keep it on. We need to change.
So you want them to eat it that
We
fast?
must need a mindset change.
Okay. Honorable.
You see the question of wastage in this country. It's something that we need to discuss another, because it's not only on that. Let's look at water. How much water you use on a daily basis. There are people in this country who would want to spend 20 liters on nothing, just wasting it. These are resources being wasted. But let me go back to what Mr. Okello just pointed. You know, yes, we have this NDP3 and we have those targets. And when we make those targets, we should also be able to have clear breakdowns on how we are going to arrive there. Because we have this target of 2025, and then what we are going to do progressively as we move towards the 20, it becomes very difficult to measure, because if we are looking at alternatives, like we are talking about a lot of electricity now being generated, talk about access. Nationally, our electricity access stands at about 22.1%. In urban areas, it's about 57.1%. In rural areas, it's 10%. Okay? This is 2023. Our target is 2025 also. So there are things we need to, and sometimes we need to look at our own environment and try to carve out things that work. For example, if we decide that a policy be put in place that everyone using charcoal stove should move from using the ordinary charcoal stove into energy saving stove.
Yeah.
Okay? That will reduce by about 20-30% the burden. Now you are progressing. And there I have seen many private companies and NGOs that have invested heavily in doing energy saving stuff, and they do very good energy. So if you were using a basin of charcoal for a week with these energy saving stoves, you end up using a basin for about 2 weeks or 2.5. Now, that is good step. So the moment we are able to come with a uniform policy that every household using this should move from this to this, that is the first step. Then we go into the other aspect. I'll give you an example. Between 2017 and 2018, in Gulu, we came with a compulsory school feeding policy. We did our research, we worked with several groups and came up with a policy. We said every rural school must feed a child in school, but the burden is on the parent. And we came with ways that work. We succeeded. Then, the next time we realized the burden was severe on our forest product because the schools were cutting trees and right? So we said, who do we work with to build energy saving stoves for the schools? World Food Program came. We built for all the primary schools. Then the next step we said, okay, since we are now saving here, we also need to sustainably look for a, so we said every school must have woodlots. So we have energy saving stove, the children are feeding in school, but long term, plant your own trees that you'll use for this. So there are stages that we need to follow. Now, we need to, and this is happening in a country like Rwanda. In Rwanda, there are days they declare where everybody goes out to plant trees. In Uganda, it is possible. And government needs to take responsibility. Because when you go to places like northern Uganda and elsewhere where trees are cut, when you see the number of trees being cut daily and those being planted, it doesn't work. So we should be able to deliberately make sure every household has a specific number of trees that they plant in a year, and it has to be a policy. And the local government entities and the rest of the structures have to work and make sure that this is our dream. So yes, there could be challenges, but we're also doing something that is filling the gap. Then we now move to the other aspect of, reducing taxes on gas and making sure we do more connection, electricity connectivity, and these ones are long term. Because when you see the total kilometers of electric lines in the country is about 3,400 kilometers. By 2025 also, government plans to have about 4,000 something kilometers. But
it's still centralized.
Exactly. It's still more of this urban setting. Now, in the rural areas, Mr. Okello gave some statistics. Majority of our rural population use firewood. Majority. Actually, I would say 98%. It is only in the trading centers where people use charcoal. So everybody is cutting trees, and the people in the villages are more reluctant in planting trees for the sake of protecting the environment. Most of the people planting trees are saying, I am planting because I want to sell. So people are planting pine, people are planting eucalyptus, people are planting now. So we need to look at all this and make sure we are able to design something that works. Otherwise, and you see, sometimes I am tempted to think that probably we need to reflect and see whether we can expand the work of NFA. By the way, NFA, when you go to every region, there's a thing present. There are not many, but they are more effective, and their enforcement team have more impact. Okay. Wherever they are, the impact is felt. So how do we begin to make the local governments also have their impacts felt? Or do we need to take away their responsibility and give to NFA? Or do we need to? So these are things that we need to look at, because there are people charged with the duty of making sure that the laws and the policies and things work, and they're not doing it.
And I'm going to come back to you there as a lawmaker to be able to give us some insight on what needs to be done. But Professor Sarah, let me come to you. Electricity is expensive. Buying a gas cylinder is expensive. Only the urban elite will be able to do this. Even the gas that was introduced by government, a cylinder is 100,000 to refill it. Whose role is it to sensitize an ordinary Ugandan? And how do we get buy-in from the people that Honorable Mpenduzi is talking about? Deep in the village, knows firewood only. How do we get buy-in, and whose role is it to sensitize these Ugandans?
Wow, thank you. I think we must be having a National Energy Commission. Yeah. They should be addressing themselves to some of these things. But I think as we discussed last week, government structures are designed in such a way that they reach the last mile. And at the level of the last mile, we are looking at the district leadership, that's the LOC5, there's secretary for production, there's a secretary for finance, there's a secretary for health. So all these structures that you see at the top have levels up to the level of the district, up to the level of the sub-county, up to the level of the parish. So these are people who should be, maybe they should be sensitized about their work to do these kinds of things. Many of them do a good job, but they are largely there to, for example, take a developer, take an NGO, take researchers. But I think they need to be equipped to do their role because they are mandated people. They have been voted in by their own people. They should do this. But for them to be able to do that, they need the kind of information the experts here do have. Because for most of us, when you talk about energy, you're talking about cutting trees. Therefore, to save the environment, don't cut trees. But there's a lot of things we are doing that destroys the environment every day. We are pouring rubbish in swamps. We are disposing of things in the wrong way. And all these things do come down. But I think what the members have said are some of the solutions. The solutions differ, and they come from different sectors. If you're talking about environment, the tree cutting, that will be the National Forestry Authority and its forest rangers, if they have them. But if you're talking about things like energy saving stoves, now that tends to be an alternative technology kind of group. They may not necessarily be high at the level, but they tend to be this small-scale entrepreneurial sector.
Artisans, yes.
Artisans. So they are the ones that are going to do that sigiri with clay inside, or they will come to the homes and mold that, or they will build biogas, whatever. So that becomes another level that you have to support. If you're talking about changing food systems, one could be, as people have asked here, why cook matoke for the whole day? Just for it to get a flavor. But could it also be a duty for people like the doctors in the College of Agriculture to come up with varieties of matoke that smell nice? Because, we are technologically advanced as a country. So we need to think out of the box, okay? I know there's a time we worked with Inaro Kawanda and people were talking about biofortified bananas, which if you cook for that very long period, you're going to lose the fortification. Yet they were being introduced because of the understanding that our matoke didn't have much in terms of nutritional value. But it became a challenge to tell the consumers of matoke not to cook this matoke for that long time. So now that one will be at a level of community sensitization, but you may also need to look at the agricultural scientists. If people want to cook matoke and banana leaves the whole day, and by the way, when banana leaves are disappearing, they are not very much in supply. What do we need to do? But there are other things I've seen being done by the agric bases. There's the introduction of pre-cooked beans. Again, those are in narrow value chains. There's an introduction of bean varieties or peas varieties that are quick cooking. Those could be other interventions we should look at. And now that becomes now the level of crop agriculture. And they will do that. Then there is another level we need to explore. Community forestry. I don't know whether this will be complicated by our land tenure systems. But in case that is not a challenge, you see, if we can have community forests where the community is involved in managing, first of all, appreciating the value, planting, managing, harvesting, that might be a better way of dealing with things. But for community forestry to come up, one, the district has to stop doing what it's doing with land, where every piece of land is being parceled out and is being sold, and likely even being sold to foreigners. So you are getting dispossession occurring, even at the lowest level. But also you will have in with people like the community educators, Minister of Gender will have to come in, Minister of Agriculture has to come in. So it's not anyone's responsibility, but different sectors have to come in. But it has to be the mandated offices. And personally, why I like mandated officers, or why I advocate for mandated officers to do their work, is it's not just in the kind of promoting things, but they also have the sanctioning. You see, one thing that has killed this country is there are no sanctions. That's why we are talking about impunity. You can do anything and get away with it. And why are you able to do anything and get away with it? Because we are living in this belief that it is everybody's responsibility and it ends up being no one's responsibility. But if we take it to a mandated office and hold that mandated office responsible for violations and there being no sanctions, then impunity will be checked. Thank you.
And Professor, the sensitization is one thing that you really emphasized. How do we get it there? And I know it cannot be one shoe fits all, the rural and the urban. Whose responsibility is it to sensitize, and how would we sensitize people, especially on this charcoal production, but also the transitioning?
As I said, it has to be a multidisciplinary team, but for example, the people who are very mandated to sensitize are community development officers, which is again another structure of government. But for them to do the right job, one, they have to stop being interested themselves. Like the NFA boss told us that some of the people who at the district became actually the very interested people, and they're giving wrong permits. I think even Honorable Mapenduzi mentioned that. So one, you have to check their interest, and that means their supervisors have to be able to sanction them. If cars and trucks have left all the way from Gulu to Kampala, where did they pass? And what was the role of at least the members who were mandated to control this trafficking from the source? The other things which enable sensitization is having a readily accessible information to the people. You know, most of this has been left to NGOs that pass through once in 5 years. And if you did not attend that NGO meeting, you lose out. But it has to be a continuous process. There has to be information available to the people. Like a lot of the information the expert scientists have is very good information, but it tends to stay with them. But if it can be availed in readily accessible format, online for those who can access online, but in the communities. Let it be in the languages people can understand, but let also people see these examples taking place. There's one thing that is very powerful in changing mindsets, and that is giving people an opportunity to visit another place. You see this being organized especially for farmers and in farming groups. They bring them from the east, they take them to the west. They get them from the west, they take them to the north, depending on what crop they are farming, whether they're in sunflower or they're in maize. And people go back with a different kind of mindset. These need to be organized. I think when people see, then they will be very interested. Like if they can visit the east and see what the Karamojong winds are doing, if they can visit the west and see what desertification has done, probably people will think twice about what they are doing.
Thank you very much. Honorable Jara, let me come to you. Domestic tariff, a unit of power, between 1 unit and 15 units is 250 shillings. When it comes to 15 to 80 units, it's 808 shillings. And when you come to 81 to 150 units, it becomes 412. An average of about 700 shillings per unit there. As a lawmaker, and also as the chairman of the public service and local government, what is failing us? Good laws, good policies, what is failing us to transition from this that is really degrading our environment to what can really propel our country into what you've already decided in 2025?
Well, I think we have very ambitious plans. In paper, there are a lot of things, a lot of stories that we tell. I think we need to begin looking at the aspect of commitment. There are these policies, there are laws, there are good ideas, there are plans, but who is putting them into action? We cannot continue making promises and promises, and then we are not seen to be doing even the targets we are putting for 2025. After every target, do we evaluate ourselves? Do we feel bad that we are failing to achieve? Do we actually feel sad that our own targets are not met? And the moment we are able to realize that, then we will begin to do things better. I have seen in many countries, let me give you the example of Aswa power plant. Government said, you know, we are going to sort out this, making sure we generate more power so people can access, and our power is going to be much cheaper. Resources were provided. These power plants, the power plants, there are two in Aswa. Done, they are generating power, but you know what is going on? Government has to pay for power being generated but not being consumed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So, and we have I think Parliament has done its part. Recently we were having a discussion. There was, last financial year, there was money provided for rural electricity connection. Parliament approved to have resources provided. And the question recently in Parliament was why the money was not spent. The activity was not conducted. And so we were wondering whether we should give more money when you are actually not using what you are given. Okay? Because the target is we have to, now that we are generating something that we consider adequate, of course we need more power as a country. And government is trying to have different power projects. But how are we using the resources that Parliament is giving to make sure that we achieve what we want to? So it's about, if it's about policies, if it's about laws, then I think this country has one of the best laws and we have got so much that we are not putting into. So you will ask me again, what is Parliament doing with that?
Yes.
Our role as Parliament is not to, there are people there are law enforcement agencies, there are people who are supposed to implement these decisions. So
as Parliament, your role is oversight.
Yeah, we have to, yes, oversight. And by the way, I don't know whether you follow what Parliament does. There is so much pressure we put. Just let me give you the example of, I think it was yesterday, when a report was presented by a committee. And then when you hear the discussion, Parliament is lamenting. There are lots of recommendations and decisions and all that. The executive should be seen to be doing its part. All right? If there are resources provided, you need to use it as it is required. If there are laws that have been made, enforcement has to so the whole thing is about implementation. Resources are being provided, the ideas are there, but people seem not to be doing what they're supposed to do. All right. Of course, we are not going to give us as Parliament. We are going to continue doing our part in playing our oversight role. I'm sure you followed the investigation on Bujagali that Parliament took. I'm sure you read those reports. So there are a lot of things we are trying to do. And the executive needs to really up the game.
Okay. Dr. Chizito, let me come to you. How important is biodiversity? How important is us living within a harmonious ecosystem? Especially this road we're going down looks very dangerous. And how do we get a critical mass to follow us in this discussion?
Okay, biodiversity. Biodiversity tackles many things, but what has been salient here, especially when we look at transition based on electric power is exclusive, so it doesn't balance well with social equity. It doesn't make energy access a fundamental right because it favors those who can afford. And then what biodiversity means that that poor person, that poor household benefits from biodiversity in terms of access of different forms of biomass to use. Whenever there are many alternatives, the cost of access goes down. So energy transition should be balanced in a way that it protects the environment, which is the factory that gives us the raw materials for energy, should be able to champion social equity, and should be able to create actually opportunities that sustain livelihoods, like create employment, re-employment opportunities. So that balance is only balanced if whichever we are suggesting as a way forward in terms of energy is going to actually boost biodiversity. What we have now is lessening biodiversity every other day. We are losing more forest cover, but we are looking at that point where we can actually boost biodiversity in terms of biomass, in plant materials and that and what. Now, what has been happening is the biomass extraction methods are targeting certain species that take a long time to regenerate. Okay? Take a long time to regenerate. Yet we have species like bamboo, other faster growing things. But because also the drive that Professor said that is economic, even if there's plantation, and this is where the legislation should come in from NFA is that there will be that one string of species planted. Okay, so even going plantation for energy, now we are talking about diversity, may actually affect biodiversity because we shall have all our slopes and landscapes filled with one species, maybe eucalyptus or whichever will be the voted species. So biodiversity is very central to us. Let's not forget that apart from energy, biodiversity gives us foreign exchange in terms of scenery and landscape and the ecological balance of wildlife and so forth. So I think deliberately, and this last 2 weeks we are discussing financial mechanisms for funding biodiversity. I think biodiversity is a social justice aspect. We need to conserve for the next generations. Government should really focus there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Okello, would carbon credits encourage planting of trees, and what more mandate do you need from legislators like Honorable Jara for the NFA to ensure that the children or our children's children have a better environment?
Yes, carbon credit would increase the returns from trees. For example, right now when we look at a tree, when we, in terms of money, we are looking at timber, we are looking at charcoal. But if we can get that carbon money from the tree standing, not being cut, and then you get paid for keeping it standing, that would be a better and more sustainable solution. Now, what we need from legislators, one, they have given us the enabling environment. They have enacted the Climate Change Act 2021, which has given provisions for Uganda to harness money from the carbon credits. What we require now is the regulations. Because you see, carbon trade is a new thing which has come on the globe. Even at international level, it is not yet well aligned. Because you see, the provisions were made in the Paris Agreement under Article 6, 6.4, 6.2. But we are now domesticating it, and countries are doing different ways of domesticating. Now, at the national level here, what we are doing now, I do recall there is a cabinet paper which was presented this week on carbon trade, because we want to go for it. That is the way to go. But we also need to sensitize people, because everybody is talking about it. But even many people don't know how do you generate that credit, because you must generate it. And then you must ensure that the credit is not, there's no leakages. You generate the credit, a carbon credit is equivalent to 1 ton. You must generate that ton of carbon, which you are going to put into the national market. And then we must have in place the expertise to do the assessment. How do we measure? Because we are measuring. We are not going, we are going to say we have, this forest is standing at about 50,000 tons of carbon. How do you must measure it. Right now, many of the people who are doing it come from outside, and you pay them. So when you are selling your credit at $10, but you see these people who are coming,
they're taking 6 from
they may
everything.
take 6 and remain with 4. So that is what government is really working on. We don't want to be cheated. We want to put in place regulations which are going to protect the country as a whole, and also protect the private farmers who will want to trade in carbon.
But also, what more does the NFA need to ensure that it gives its mandate the full authority? Some of the things Honorable Jara said, there are few people in the districts to be able to handle this thing. So what more do you need from the legislators here for you to carry out your mandate?
I would say, you know, there are so many things which is there, but most of them are not operationalized. For example, recently, last year, in fact, in November, His Excellency the President okayed the recruitment of environment rangers, where 1,000 were supposed to be deployed to forestry, 500 to NEMA, 500 to the wetland inspection, wetland management department in the Ministry of Water. That is 2,000 personnel, armed, trained and armed to manage these resources. But when it came to personalizing it, we didn't have the resources. And as I talk now, I think NEMA is recruiting the initial 200. That is what we could afford in this financial year. So if we could get the resources to recruit these people, train them, resource them, and deploy them, then possibly, just like Professor was saying, we have very few people on the ground. In fact, if I can give you an example, you may find one forest ranger is patrolling 20,000 hectares, which you're supposed to do on foot, because in the forest you can't drive, which is impossible. You cannot do it. 20,000 hectares
that's about 50,000. I mean, 500,000? No, 20,000 is about
50,000 acres.
Yes, about 50,000 acres.
Yeah. So you cannot do it. So that is the dilemma which we have. We don't have enough boots on the ground.
About 3 square miles.
But we are also trying now to use technology, because you see, things have also changed. We now have technology. We are using GIS and remote sensing. We are also using the unmanned aerial vehicles to try to do the patrol from the air. You can detect where people are burning charcoal. You can detect where people are cutting trees. You take the GPS position, then you can now go on the ground. So we're also trying to use that. By then we can see, we get alerts in our office here of forest infringement. There's a technology we are using now. If a forest is being attacked somewhere, you can get alert here, then you ring the people on the ground.
But Mr. Okello, I am up to, you know, this is exciting. You did exceptionally well when you were working with HOA.
Yes.
I think HOA has seen a lot of transformation.
Yeah.
Okay. And that I see the same spirit, but I think you need to do more. Yeah. Probably you are not being supported. Probably you are lacking some of the things you are talking about. Yeah. But when you look at how HOA has, you know, transformed itself, how it's performing, I think there are entities in this country that are doing well, that we can learn from, and if we can carry the same spirit and make sure we put that kind of effort in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost running out of time, so I'll give you parting shots. I'll start with Dr. Sarah, and I'll go all the way until Mr. Okello. Dr. Sarah.
Thank you very much. And what I need to say is, for starters, we need to be able to protect our biodiversity. And we need to learn from the past. In the past, people successfully and sustainably lived with the environment, because the environment provided food, the environment provided medicines, the environment provided rainfall, the environment supported the communities to live. But with capitalistic exploitation, everything we look at, we see money signs and we want to bring down. So if you look at what is being destroyed, I mean, what is being earned compared with what is being lost, actually there's a lot being lost, which is not even being documented. So we cannot just count the money. We need to be concerned. But for us to be able to sustain this concern with the different directives we've had from the highest offices, but also from the lowest offices, we need to create the incentives to power this change. And as people have emphasized, we need to make sure, I think it's Dr. Simon who talked about social equity and social justice with regard. Yes. We should not only look at the elites, but also look at the poor people. What do the poor have? And by the way, the poor have never been a problem to the environment. It is largely the rich people who come and create these incentives and extract and destroy. So let us invest in mechanisms that will make it easier for everyone to comply, and for those who do not comply, sanctions should come in place. Thank you
very much. Honorable Jar.
I think the starting point should be beginning to build a new culture. We need to begin to realize that, you know, every citizen has a duty to play, has a role to play in making sure that we protect the environment and add value to what we have got. And that starts with you as an individual, but also at family level. How much do we begin to involve children, teaching children the right culture, the right mentality? In some places you cannot cut down just a tree, one tree, or even a branch, you will be in trouble. Because people will not just look at you and leave you to continue doing it. So the moment people begin to take responsibility and they know this is about our life, this is about our future, that will change a lot. We also need to make deliberate efforts in making sure that tree planting becomes compulsory. Every year, each one of us, you and I, should be able to first account to ourselves. You need to account to yourself, and I account to myself how many trees I have planted. Before you even begin to think about how many trees are being cut down, how many have you planted? Just about 3 weeks ago, I was in Gulu planting trees. By the way, every year, fortunately, I have I do farming and we raise trees, and we do it with young boys who are very, they have become very passionate about tree planting, and they are busy raising nursery, and they give it out to the community. We need to build that culture, start planting trees and helping people understand that we are doing this now, but also for the future. The other thing that we need to take very seriously is the role of the key stakeholders, the key players, local governments, NFA, the police, different agencies that are charged with the responsibility, charged with the duty of making sure they enforce these laws. They need to be doing their part and doing it correctly. Because if the president has issued directives and then you find there are still some leakages, there are people who try to, and even these body vehicles, trucks that move, they still go through the roadblocks, they are stopped, and these guys know their bags of charcoal and all that. The law enforcement agencies need to set standards where people will begin to respect them. The moment they stick to what the law requires, that respect will be earned. So there are things we need to do, and I think lastly, government needs to, yes, having directives is good, but if we don't look at how we come up with strategies that are sustainable enough, because it will take a few months, the president's directive will be forgotten. Then you find there is another panya, another shortcut people have taken and they're doing it. Then again, next time we have to disturb the president to come with another directive. I don't think that is the best way to do things. So we need to look at, and there are technocrats, there are people who should come up with these ideas. We are talking about these fast-growing trees. There are trees that can grow 3.5 years. They are old enough to be harvested. They can be. So we have got the scientists who are trying their best. But again, the question is, how is the Ministry of Water and Environment working with such players to support them so that their ideas can actually create impact? Everyone is trying to do their own thing, and it's not about how we can join hands and build something. It's about spending money. It's about, I think that's a wrong way of doing things, and we need to improve.
Thank you very much. Dr. Chizito?
Yes, thank you. I think the transition to cleaner renewables is possible because Uganda has a high potential, even compared to the West. But 4 things that I'm going to highlight here. We need a strong policy, a supportive policy to create an enabling environment. The idea of transitioning using concessional physical allocation based on tax surpluses can no longer work. The idea of having centralized electric power-based transition can no longer work because the tariffs will go higher and higher depending on the distance between where it is produced and where it is being consumed. So there's need to harness different financing mechanisms. For example, I think private capital is out there. We need to harness that. We need to make innovation-based private sector public partnerships. For example, I think there are so many private actors that would want to take this opportunity. They have been waiting for that ban to come. such that they say we have solutions. But two things, and which are policy related. The managing of the microeconomics there. How do I price my innovation in terms of renewable energy to sell it even to the national grid? Because there could be many other ways. There could be cogeneration, but if I am this business entrepreneur and I can produce electricity cogenerated from biomass, there is not so much policy stipulating that this will be the cost per megawatt or something like that. So that is, that redundancy, the market pricing is still, for example, you can have so much biogas, you don't even know how to sell it. So because for long we have been looking at electricity as a mode of transition, we have the kilowatt hour unit and we know the market value. But for most renewables, we don't have the market value. And that is really washing down the innovations in renewables.
Thank you.
I think lastly, as a matter of policy, I think a strong public sector gives birth to a strong private sector.
Thank you.
So we need enablers so that private capital can be harnessed and people can invest into renewables, and then the microeconomics should be streamlined, that if this investor who has invested this way, they can earn this way, and then the investment, a return on investments is not perceived as risky. Anyhow, in a nutshell, we need to de-risk the perception that is surrounding renewables.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Lastly, Mr.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. I think we need a paradigm shift. We need a U-turn in our mindset. We need to change and be more patriotic to our country. We need to love what God has given us and also manage our consumption and perhaps greed. We are seeing people who are becoming more greedy and they want to take everything. And yet, some of these are common good for the benefit of everybody. We need to accept policies which government is putting in place to protect the common user resources, the common good resources, which is for the benefit of everybody. We need to appreciate that environment is a human right, as enshrined in the Constitution. Every Ugandan is entitled to a clean and healthy environment, and we really need to ensure that we have that environment. We need to appreciate that nature can do without us, but we may not do without nature at our current technology and level of income and level of technology we have. Turning to the charcoal, this value chain is largely informal. There is need to formalize it. We need to regulate it. And it is very lucrative. People are doing it behind the scenes, and we don't know what they are getting. But I remember the Minister of Energy did some assessment in 2015-16. It was having a lot of money, over $200 million US. That is the trade in the country. So it is something which we should not just brush aside. We may be losing a lot of revenue as government from such business. We need to look at innovations. We are talking of alternatives. Perhaps we need more research in some of these alternatives, and then also how do we incubate them and then popularize them and then market them and make them available and at an affordable price for the common person, so that we can address these issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me read some feedback that has come through, quite interesting. You shouldn't forget about the rate at which the population is growing. It's a main factor. Economic development, the extent at which the economy is growing, how far can you control birth rates? Okay, I'll leave that one at that. Muzafiru Inbale says, I think the best to overcome this situation of banning charcoal may be government should start providing each home with electricity and also reduce on the tariffs of that and give them electric cookers. Okay, interesting. Thank you for the show. High percentage have no chance of accessing, the high percentage of Ugandans don't have a chance of alternative sources of energy like charcoal. How is government preparing before it talks of implementing laws? Finally, I want to thank Simon, and how do students in small charcoal users be helped in this case? The people cannot be able to access biogas or the cost of electricity compared to charcoal. Using things like gas, paraffin are not clean energy, and we need to be able to do something about it. Okay, let's leave it at that. And in conclusion today is us collaborating, mindset change. Those are some of the things that have been discussed here, but also alternatives both in clean energy and renewables, and a lot of investment in research and development. I want to thank Professor Sarah for coming through. Honorable Jara, thank you very much. Dr. Chizito, I hope you'll come through again. And Mr. Okello, thank you very much for coming through. And we'll end the show by thanking also the team that has been behind the production today. They have made sure that we are comfortable where we are. And we'll end with this quote: let's be the change we want to see in this country. Thank you very much. God bless you and good morning.
BIOMAS. Nsobola okusasula ne momo?
No.
Ha. Hey, nsobola okusasula ne momo? Ha.
Yino merchant code yaffe.
Oh, kirungi.
Sebo meka?
Ebiri. Nyabo, nsobola okusasula ne momo?
Bambi nedda.
Ha. Baby, tuve wano.
Mukibango okusasula ne MTN Momo kigirako emigaso mingi n'egisingako eri buli omu tekikola makulu okubanga tugirina.
Nkimye rent.
Nsobola okusasula